Hi everybody, I'm back with another video tutorial for something that I have started new, and that is knitting brioche. And this is my very first project ever in 2-color brioche and my very first project ever doing brioche. But I have been watching and following techniques in brioche and watching videos of people doing it, so I have a fair idea of what I'm doing, and by looking at this I would say that I'm doing fairly well. So while I was doing my project, which is a cowl in 2 colors of fingering weight yarn, I noticed that I have made a few mistakes. So let me flip this inside out. And my mistakes were not picking up these bars while I was doing the brioche stitch. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to put up a video on how I will go about fixing these mistakes. So what I'm going to do is go one by one through these stitches and through these columns and fix my mistakes, and while I do so I will try to comment on what I'm doing. So the very first thing that I need to do is drop that very first stitch where I have a mistake, that column. So I'm going to drop that stitch now and I'm going to let it go all the way till I reach that mistake. By the way, I'm using 2 fingering weight yarns that I've already said. One is my own one-of-a-kind self-striping. It'll be 2 colors, bougainvillea and green leaves. And the other one is one that I bought from Knit Picks. And I think that is their Hawthorn fingering speckled yarn, and it's not as smooth as my base, but it's a great base for doing projects, and it's really warm. So now that I have dropped all my stitches to this bar, okay, I'm gonna put this bar behind, and if you see, my stitches are in the self-striping yarn. So that is my main yarn, and the white yarn that's going on here is the float that goes behind that stitch. All right. So if you see clearly over here, you will see that every stitch has a float behind it, and that's what makes the column. So now I have hooked my crochet hook through that stitch, and if you see, each stitch has a float behind it, and which is called a shawl by some brioche knitters, and that's what we are going to make sure doesn't come in front of our stitch. So this is my stitch, that's the float of that stitch. Now I'm going to do this column, so I pick up the float which will go behind my main stitch, and then I'll pick up this green yarn which will go through both loops on my hook, and see, that's completely seamless. So now next one, this float has already been captured, so I'm using this one now, and then I'm going to pick up that red yarn which will go through this red yarn which will go through both. Okay, now this stitch again, and this red yarn will go through both. So you see, these stitches are being picked up correctly. So let me show it again. This float is already worked on, so pick up this float and the next green yarn, the self-striping yarn, and then take that self-striping under the float and through the stitch on the hook. Now I have a new stitch on the hook. This float is already taken care of, so I put my hook under this float, okay, and take the next self-striping float from near that float of white yarn, and then I pull that through under the white and through that stitch on the hook. So now if you see, this whole column is being fixed properly. So let me do that one more time. Again, this float which is right behind my stitch, current stitch, is already taken care of. I just have to put my hook through this float and over that red yarn, and then pull that yarn through the stitch on my hook, which was green. Now it's red. Now go through that again under the float, pick that self-striping yarn, bring it under that white float again, and then through the stitch. So if you see now, that column is fixed properly, and that I'll do one more time and I'll be done, and I'll put this on the left needle. Okay, so this one is done and I am putting it through onto the left needle. Now since this is my inside of this project, I'm going to put it back the right way. I'm going to turn my needle and my yarn is now the proper way. I turn my work and I have to drop this stitch. So I'm dropping that stitch now. Since this is pure wool, the strands are catching on each other. We just ease them out. The stitches don't want to go anywhere, so you are fine. Okay, so I'm at that point where I need to pick up that green stitch now. So here I'm putting that green stitch on my hook. Okay, and that float is taken care of because each stitch will have a float behind it. So I go to the float the next float there, and then I pull the green yarn through under it and through the stitch on the hook. Okay, now this float is taken care of. This white is taken care of. I go under this one now. Sorry, under this next one, and then pull the red yarn through under the float and through the stitch. Now the next one. Okay, now turn it back, put that stitch back on the hook, or on the left needle. So that is how I fix my mistake. And if you see the piece now, I'll go all around it and you will not see a mistake. And then I flip it inside out. So I go all around it and there's no mistake. Hope you find this video helpful. If you do, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channels if you want to see more tutorial videos on knitting and crochet techniques. And I will be doing more of product reviews in the future. Also, follow my Instagram profile at Krityum Handmaids. All the details are in the description box below. See you there. Thank you.